Hello, guys. What is happening? And welcome to today's stream. So, obviously, first of all, the thing that I want to put out and is extremely important for everybody to understand is I don't condone war. I think war is wrong. I think violence is wrong. But having said that, we need to look closely into what we are being told and being fed, as I'm always saying on this channel. So the thing is, obviously, a lot of people, there's a lot of emotion around this subject, Russia and the Ukraine. We know there's a lot of emotion around this. But what I kind of find interesting is since all this obviously started, you have seen people immediately believe everything that they see in the media with regards to this conflict. And it's easy to jump along the onto the bandwagon with that, and people get very emotional over it. And really, we have to dig a little deeper and analyze whether or not our own countries like Canada, the US, the UK have been funding war and the killing of innocent civilians for decades, which we know is true. But we're going to go through it anyway and just show you the hypocrisy of people like Joe Biden coming out and saying, you shouldn't be doing that, Russia, but they're doing that, maybe not directly, but indirectly, they're doing that and funding that. So it's ludicrous to me and frustrating because, as you know, the mainstream media tries and turns things around. They have an interest, a political one, especially, and all these leaders, Trudeau, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, have terrible approval ratings. So this is a great time to boost the numbers. So the thing is, you have to also realize that war is always going on and it's like a machine. And who profits out of war? And it's these Western countries that sell the weapons. So anyway, guys, without further ado, we're going to get into this article here and go through, and you'll be able to see for yourselves. So the title of this article, it's time to stop US arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And here we go. So the war in Yemen is America's war. Saudi Arabia has spent a fortune buying arms from America to prosecute a war that has killed almost 250,000 people. So that is huge, guys, and horrible and horrific number. And the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe in our lifetime. That's what it says right there. 2 American administrations have enabled the war. It's long past time to stop. So we're analyzing this to show the hypocrisy now of the mainstream media in the West. And obviously, the thing is, guys, these stories happen in the shadows. They're reported, but albeit in the shadows. So the stories are there, but they're not blown up into our face like they are right now. So anyway, let's carry on with this article. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the preeminent think tank tracking arms sales, Saudi Arabia was the world's largest arms importer from 2015 to 2019. The first 5 years of the Yemen war, its imports of major arms increased by 130% compared with the previous 5-year period. Despite the wide-ranging concerns in the US and the United Kingdom about Saudi Arabia's military intervention in Yemen, both Washington and London continued to export arms to Saudi Arabia from 2015 to 2019. A total of 73% of Saudi Arabia's arms imports came from the US and 13% from the UK. So what you can kind of gather from that is basically indirectly the US and the UK are supporting the conflict in Yemen, which has killed 250,000 people and lots of civilians as well. It's a heartbreaking tragedy, and they could have stopped it, but they didn't stop it. Now, interestingly enough, it gets even more interesting now, and you're gonna, I mean, none of this is funny, but you're just going to fall off your chair when you see the next story after this. Barack Obama could have stopped the war at its start in 2015 by cutting military, diplomatic, and intelligence support for the Saudi led coalition that imposed a blockade on Yemen and began deadly airstrikes on civilian targets. So, this was happening. It wasn't in the mainstream, but this was happening. It was being partly and indirectly instituted by the US mainly, and also the UK, by selling of weapons. So the weapons that people were making in the United States were going to Saudi Arabia, and the government knew that they were going to be used to bomb and kill innocent civilians in this war. But they did it anyway, because war is a profit machine, and these people are psychopaths, as we've discussed before. And this is what is so important about this, is you have to then think about what they're saying now about Russia and what Russia's doing, which I totally condemn, and it's totally wrong. However, they are partly responsible for what Russia is doing, because the lack of negotiation when it came to the NATO, Ukraine becoming part of NATO, which they never said is not going to be an option. And they could have just said, Ukraine is never going to be a part of NATO, but they chose not to. And what do they do when the war starts? We've got Canada, the US, and the UK sending weapons to Ukraine. Again, do you see a common theme here? Sending weapons. You know, these wars are happening with the weapons that we create here. And it's important to note. So anyway, let's continue. The administration's regional military commander, now Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, reportedly advised against supporting the Saudi campaign and predicted it would be a failure. The Senate confirmation process for Austin gave insufficient attention to the issue. It would be useful to know more about the debate inside the Obama administration during the start of the war. Who were the proponents of backing Riyadh and Abu Dhabi? Who were the doubters? And that's important, isn't it? Because this is the Obama administration that's supporting it, but we'll see just now that the Trump administration has supported it, and the Joe Biden administration. So just voting in another politician, is it going to make any difference? Seemingly no. The Trump administration was totally enthusiastic about the war, which is sickening. But Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was convinced the Saudis could win, and that it would be a great defeat for the Iranians, who backed the rebel Houthi Zadar. I can't even say it. He led an effort to designate the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization in the last week of the administration. Iran is the big winner in the war. The Houthis have moved closer to Iran as the war progressed, and Iran has significantly more clout in Sana'a today than 6 years ago. Its provision of missile and drone technology has enabled the Houthis to strike Riyadh, these names, and other Saudi targets. Iran's military God, I can't tongue twisted. Allies in Iraq may now also be launching militia. That's what I wanted to say. Militia allies in Iraq may now also be launching attacks on Riyadh. Last month, a pro-Iranian Iraqi group claimed credit for attacking Riyadh with drones, an important escalation in the sectarian violence in the region. The war cost Saudi Arabia a fortune. it is likely that Iran will encourage the Houthis to keep fighting. Now, this is interesting. Italy has now taken the lead in taking concrete steps to stop the war by cutting off all military sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The two are the 10th and 11th largest buyers of Italian arms. Rome has blocked the transfer of more than 12,000 missiles to the Saudis. It is a commendable step, and others should follow. And this is really interesting. And bear in mind, guys, this is Thursday, February 4th, 2021. So obviously Joe Biden was just coming into office or nearly in office at that point. As a candidate, Joe Biden promised to end American support for the Saudi war. His administration has halted arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, at least temporarily, for review, including the $35 billion deal to sell Abu Dhabi F-35 fighter jets. It has also frozen the foreign terrorist organization designation for the moment. These are the right choices and should become permanent. Now, remember this part, because you will fall off your, well, you won't fall off your chair. You probably know what's coming. You're not stupid. I know that you guys know what's coming. Today, President Biden announced an end to support for offensive operations by the Saudis. We will need to see how this is transferred into a concrete policy. Does it mean an end to the blockade, which is the most important element in the malnourishment of Yemenis? It continues support for Saudi air defenses against missiles and drones, but does it halt support for airstrikes on missile batteries? Time works against the Yemeni people. Every 10 minutes, a Yemeni child under the age of 5 dies due to the blockade. An urgent international effort with a new United Nations Security Council resolution is necessary, and Biden's appointment of a special envoy for Yemen with long experience in the region, Tim Luther King, is a good step. It's time to stop the carnage in Yemen and stop fueling the arms race in the Middle East. So it's important that this article was in February, and how do we think that progressed? Well, get ready to fall off your chair, because let's have a look. Saudi gets first major arms deal under Biden with air-to-air missiles. So they were just talking in the other article there about missiles and that they were temporarily halted and whatever. And here they are. This is in November of last year, and they are sending missiles to, again, keep that conflict going, which is killing thousands and thousands of civilians. And, war goes on all over the world, but I just think that this, I mean, it's sad to say the least. So, Washington, November 4, Reuters, the US State Department approved its first major arms deal sale to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia under US President Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was the one who was supposedly going to stop the arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Of course, just like Trump, just like Barack Obama, he is continuing the tradition of funding wars and conflicts abroad away from home, whilst in the shadows and not in the media. The thing is, if this was all in the media and it was brought to the front of our attention, then it would be very different, wouldn't it? Because the public opinion, once they found out that innocent children were being killed as a result of the US sending missiles and helicopters and fighter jets to fund this war, it would be a different public opinion, wouldn't it? But there's a reason that that's kept out of the press, and that reason is simple, isn't it? Because they don't want, because there's a commercial and political interest there. The commercial interest is the sale of all these arms, which is a huge deal, $650 million. And the political one is Joe Biden doesn't want to be made out that he is in some way partly responsible for the innocent killing of many, many civilians in Yemen. So it's just, this is the hypocrisy that we live in. While Saudi Arabia is an important partner in the Middle East, US lawmakers have criticized Riyadh for its involvement in the war in Yemen, a conflict considered one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. They have refused to approve many military sales for the kingdom without assurances US equipment would not be used to kill civilians. The Pentagon notified Congress of the sale on Thursday. If approved, the deal would be the first sale to Saudi Arabia since the Biden administration adopted a policy of selling only defensive weapons to the Gulf Valley. The State Department had approved the sale on October 26. A spokesperson said, adding that the air-to-air missile sale comes after an increase in cross-border attacks against Saudi Arabia over the past year. Raytheon Technology makes the missiles. Okay, so there you have a public listed company that makes the missiles. Are they going to benefit from this? Of course, they're going to benefit from this. And there's a commercial and political interest there. And was this on the front page of all the news? No, it wasn't. But when it comes to Russia and the Ukraine, where Russia is practically attacking the Ukraine and doing similar things, but directly, that would be like the West sending weapons to Russia. What they're doing in Yemen is very similar to that. They're sending weapons to, and we're just sending them to the Ukraine instead of trying to work to get a resolution. The lack of negotiation that has gone on between Russia and the US and the UK and NATO has been astonishing. But we know that this is a common theme that goes on, isn't it, guys? When we don't like the policy of somebody, or we don't like somebody, or we don't like what somebody says, what do? We don't negotiate. Just look at the truckers as an example of that. That is just such a raw example of that. Working class people protesting. We don't like your views, so we're going to label you racists, misogynists, and everything under the sun. And we're not going to negotiate with you at all. We're not going to negotiate. We're just going to use force or do it in a backhanded way. So it's very important. And the sale is fully consistent with the administration's pledge to lead with diplomacy to end the conflict in Yemen. The State Department spokesperson said in a statement, the air-to-air missiles ensure that Saudi Arabia has the means to defend itself from Iranian-backed Houthi air attacks. And those will likely be used against civilians. I mean, it's just all fluff. They're trying to make it out like, oh, yeah, it's okay. But it's not. After the Trump administration's friendly approach with Riyadh, the Biden administration recalculated its approach to Saudi Arabia, a country with which it has severe human rights concerns, but which is also one of Washington's closest US allies in countering the threat posed by Iran. So again, they have a political interest, guys. All these politicians, they do not do things to help people. But that's how it comes across, isn't it? When they say that, oh, we're sending some aid to these countries like the Ukraine. Okay, we're sending military weapons. Canada, the UK, and the US sent military weapons to the Ukraine. And the aid that was sent there, number one, who paid for that, guys? Because somebody had to pay for that because businesses produce those weapons. So who paid for it? Well, in the case of Canada, it's the taxpayer. So the taxpayer is indirectly funding that conflict in the Ukraine. I mean, as I said, I don't condone war or violence, but the fact that they are sending lots of weapons, don't you think that that's going to continue the conflict for longer and longer and longer? And there will be even more bloodshed and collateral damage of civilian casualties, which is just terrible. It's outrageous and disgusting. And that's our tax dollars that are being used for that. And it is sickening, absolutely sickening. But this is the times that we live in. And it's almost like you have to decrypt what the mainstream media is saying because it is just all wrong. So don't fall under the trap that a lot of people have fell under, I think, this week, is that because there's a war now going on in the Ukraine and Russia, and it's all in the mainstream, that they suddenly think that the reporting of that war is accurate. Because again, it's not going to be accurate. And I again want to make clear that I do not support Russia. But I'm basically saying that the West are equally as accountable for what's going on in the Ukraine as Russia is, because the negotiation could have been better and they didn't meet what Russia was asking for, which was essentially them to just say that the Ukraine wasn't going to become a part of NATO, and they just couldn't do that. And that is the reason that Russia went in wrongly, but that's the reason. So the lack of negotiation back and forth, I don't know if you caught much of that, but again, it was the same thing with the truckers. If we don't like, they don't like Russia. That is obvious. Like the West does not like Russia at all. And what they're doing now with cutting them off SWIFT and the sanctions, which aren't going to really do anything, is only going to make Russia stronger and more self sufficient. Realize that. Because if they relied on more imports, then they wouldn't be as strong, would they? But if you cut them off, then essentially they're going to become stronger. And Russia already like they're already pretty much self sufficient. So what they're doing is just making Russia stronger, essentially, in my opinion, with their crappy sanctions. So the package would include 280 advanced medium range air to air missiles, 596 missile rail launchers, along with containers and support equipment, spare parts, US government contractor engineering, and technical support. Despite approval by the State Department, the notification did not indicate that a contract has been signed and the negotiations have concluded. So I don't know if this went through. I probably think it would have gone through. But again, this is Biden doing exactly what, he's it's just this involvement in war that the West has. And I also had another article of when it was basically, here we go. So I'll show you this. US defends airstrikes that killed civilians in Syria. So this is in November 2021, but obviously it was earlier. I think it was 2019. Yeah. The US military has defended as legitimate an airstrike which killed dozens of people in Syria in 2019. The attack on so-called Islamic State fighters killed 80 people as the group made their last stand. The US identified 16 of the dead as militants and 4 civilians. But officials could not conclude on more than 60, and a spokesperson told the BBC it was highly likely more civilians were killed. An independent investigation into the strike was never conducted. Why? Why wasn't it conducted? Something to hide, maybe? According to a New York Times report, which accused the military of a cover up. Again, guys, so, you know, Russia has actually came out and accused the West before of hypocrisy And it just goes to show that, you know, the US, and with support of the UK and all the allies, have been doing the same thing as Russia is doing in the Ukraine, attacking different, you know, groups and killing civilians essentially. And it I don't condone any of it. I think it's all wrong. I think war is wrong. I think this violence is wrong. But it's just all about political interests, commercial interests, and the way it's reported to us is just, again, shocking. The airstrikes occurred on 18th of March 2019 in the town of Baghdad in eastern Syria, then the last stronghold of the so-called IS Caliphate. 3 bombs were dropped by US jets on a large group of people despite drone footage showing the presence of civilians, according to the New York Times. And I might be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's a war crime. But I may be wrong there. So commanders ignored alarm expressed in the immediate aftermath, and a subsequent investigation into the incident by the Defense Department's Inspector General was stripped of any mention of the strike, the newspaper reported. It added that no thorough independent investigation had ever happened. Leadership just seemed to set on burying this. No one wanted anything to do with it. Gene Tate, an official who worked on the case and said he was forced out of his job, told the newspaper. Again, like, you know, you don't like what we do or what we say, we're just going to get rid of you. We're just going to get rid of you. We're going to silence you. We're going to censor you. That's exactly the the way it's going. So only afterwards he went on, what's this? EU now says they will cut off some Russian banks off SWIFT. Okay, so that, I mean, cutting SWIFT is going to affect Europe more than it'll affect Russia. And some banks, I mean, essentially, if Russia like was to stop, to just say we're going to stop all exports to the EU, and the EU said we're going to stop all imports, who would be worst off in that situation? It would be the EU, not Russia. So I think what they're trying to do is just make a stand, make it look like they're doing something when they're actually not doing a lot. And the fact that it's some Russian banks, well, I want to know like why only some? What's going on with the others? So that's interesting. It's very interesting. The West has proved itself to be impotent and incompetent when they attacked Iraq in 1990, and then in 2003, saying there were um, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Why cannot they do something for Ukraine? Yeah, exactly. It's. I'm surprised they're not, but they're not in NATO. So, but neither was well, yeah. I mean, the Iraq thing is like sort of kind of insane when you think about what happened in Iraq, and that was really, in some ways, similar to what Russia is doing in the Ukraine. And there was a lot of collateral damage. There was US troops that were killed, UK troops, you know, Canadian troops that were killed in Iraq. And they were looking for these weapons of mass destruction, and all they found were empty warehouses. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go into that too much because there's far too much. You don't know what's right. That's the problem, because everything's covered up. Um, Leadership just seemed. Oh yeah, we did that. In a statement to the BBC, spokesman corporate Bill Urban said U.S. troops have been assured there were no civilians in the area at the time of the attack. Only afterwards, he went on, did the U.S. become aware of high-resolution video from a drone operated by an unidentified U.S. ally suggesting civilians had been present. And footage from that drone enabled the US to conclude their bombs had killed 16 fighters and 4 civilians, but could not conclusively characterize the status of more than 60 other casualties, likely civilians. The reason for this uncertainty is that multiple armed women and at least one armed child were observed in the video, and the exact mixture of armed and unarmed personnel could not be conclusively determined. Likely, a majority of those that were killed were also combatants at the time of the strike. However, it is also highly likely that there were additional civilians killed by those two strikes. An investigation concluded that these two strikes were legitimate self defense strikes and no disciplinary actions were warranted, Corporal Urban continues. He did not address New York Times accusation that there had been a cover up in the investigation conducted by the Inspector General's office. So, I mean, and that goes into who is ISIS and all that, and we don't really need to get into that. So it's just, I mean, all the sanctions that are happening right now on Russia will go into like what the US and Canada exports and imports to Russia, because obviously that's kind of equally important when you're talking about sanctions on imports and exports. So we'll go into that next. We'll start off with Canada and then we'll go into the US. So this is OEC, and basically we can see some of the exports and what's going on. So basically, Canada exports, well, in 2019 is the latest year by the look of it that they have data on, but they exported $594 million to Russia, but they imported 1.09 billion. So they're importing almost double what they're exporting. So they're at a deficit. So what are they importing? That's what we want to know. So in 2019, Russia exported, wow, you probably can't see that. Oh, crap. I've done it on the wrong one. Oh, rookie mistake. Oh, there we go. This is going to make it really hard to read. But okay, so if you look at this, this is Russia Canada business. So let's highlight this cyan. There we go. In 2019, Russia exported 1.09 billion to Canada. The main products that Russia exported to Canada were crude, which just makes you laugh your head off, doesn't it? Because I mean, Canada has some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, and yet we're importing crude and refined petroleum products like gasoline. And that just kind of makes you laugh, doesn't it? We're unable to even cater for our own demand here. And and what do you think is going to happen if they try and clamp down on the oil and gas sector? Do you think that's going to reduce the consumption? Because it's not. All it's going to mean is it's coming from a different place at a higher price because the transportation cost. So the main imports were petroleum and crude and platinum. And that's what Canada mainly imports from Russia. So what do they export to Russia? So let's take a look at that. Let's highlight this in, I don't know, green. Yeah, let's do green. In 2019, Canada exported 594 million to Russia. The main products that Canada exported to Russia are planes, helicopters, and or spacecraft, 68 million, radioactive chemicals, so I'm guessing uranium, and animal food. During the last 24 years, the exports of Canada to Russia have increased at an annualized rate of 5.88%. Pretty insignificant, I would say. So again, it's pretty interesting. So let's go on to America right now, because they're obviously going to be exporting more than Canada, which they are. So, okay. So, in 2019, we've got the same thing. They exported 9.21 billion, way more than Canada, but obviously a way bigger economy for a start off. And then the exports from Russia to America, 14.4 billion. Do you see a running theme here of their bringing in more products from Russia than we're actually selling to them? So we're at another deficit there for the US, and this continues, doesn't it? This just reoccurring theme. So who gets harmed the most in that transaction? Well, obviously Russia's economy gets harmed because they're not going to be sending that product to us. But where are they going to send that product? Because they've been making deals with other countries all last year. Like this, I mean, you could have seen this coming a mile away. They made deals with Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, funnily enough. Remember that country? They made deals with them. China. So, I mean, if the product doesn't come here, all that oil and petroleum product, it'll go to China. So, really, who's losing then? We're losing because the price of oil and gasoline is going to go up. And this is going to be an inflationary crisis, as I've said. So, let's first of all talk about what Russia exports to the US. So let me get that highlighted. Okay. In 2019, Russia exported 14.4 billion to the United States. The main products that Russia exported to the United States were refined petroleum, again, gasoline products, and platinum. Do you see a running theme here, guys? Petroleum products, platinum, and crude oil. That it's the same three things that we have in Canada. So, do we need those products? How's the price of platinum doing these days? How's the price of crude oil doing? How's the price of petroleum, like gasoline, doing? Who's going to be the most hurt by these sanctions? That's what I'm trying to get to. So let's see what the United States exported to Russia. And again, we see a similar theme with this as well. So in 2019, United States exported 9.21 billion to Russia. The main products that United States exported to Russia are planes, helicopters, and spacecraft, which is again the same as Canada, and also cars and vehicle parts. During the last 24 years, the exports of the United States to Russia have increased at an annualized rate of 5%. And they've increased quite substantially from 1995, 2.75 billion. But yeah, with inflation and everything like that, it's probably not that much. But yeah, it's increased at a more rapid rate, the imports from Russia than the exports, because in Canada and in Canada, I was going to say in Russia, but that's totally wrong. In Canada and the US, we tend to we consume more than we actually send out, basically. So that should be really interesting, shouldn't it? Because you can see who's going to get harmed the most. And again, it's refined petroleum, platinum, and crude oil. What goes into making platinum? Somebody Google that and stick it in the chat, because I'm sure platinum goes into making a lot of products. Maybe I don't know, circuit boards, something like that. So it's just at market, since you're in Alberta, you probably have a better sense of this. If the price of gas is going so high because of this war, what's stopping Canada from increasing production? Well, I think they are going to be increasing production. The thing is that, well, they are increasing production anyway. But the thing is it going to be enough? And we don't have the pipelines to get all these products across the country, because people like Joe Biden killed the Keystone XL pipeline. they stop or us being able to get our product. I mean, just look at the debacle with the Trans Mountain pipeline, for example. So the banks are also getting more nervous about lending money to fund the oil sands because they're seeing it as they're going to get scrutinized in the future because it's unsustainable in the government's eyes. But again, this is all just smoke and mirrors, because when you really think about it, guys, when you really think about the whole situation that's going on, you realize that essentially it's like, with everything that happens, they're just trying to move the problem somewhere else instead of solve the problem. That seems to be the exact thing that is happening every time. Move the problem to another place, and then we can act like the heroes. But that's actually not the case, is it? Because the problem's just been moved to somewhere else and it's affecting somebody else now, and we haven't actually dealt with the problem. It's exactly like the electric vehicles. And I like this one because it's so dumb. Like, it needs no explanation. Like, if we all went and bought electric vehicles, let's say we could, and we all went and bought electric vehicles. I mean, number one, we wouldn't be able to produce the electricity to charge them all. You got that problem. And then number two, where on earth would all these electric vehicle companies get the lithium from, and the silver and other products that go into these cars? Because they need to get them from somewhere. There's a lot of copper, there's a lot of precious metals that go into these products. And lithium, the main thing that goes into the batteries, that's coming from third world countries in what they call the, I forget what they call it. It's like the lithium triangle that's in South America. And it is terrible what's happening to people down there. Is they're having their water cut off because the lithium mines are essentially siphoning off the water supply. And they're calling this white gold lithium. Well, again, that's just going to lead to just more disastrous consequences to the environment. So the real thing is, the idea in the West is just to move the problem somewhere else and then claim you fixed it, is a total joke. It's like if they shut down the oil sands tomorrow, well, we would just be importing oil from somewhere else. So we've moved the problem, but they would be claiming a victory like, oh my God, we're net zero, whatever. Like, we're not producing all these emissions anymore. It's a total joke. I think it will really come down to hydrogen. And hydrogen, I believe, is honestly the future. I mean, I'm talking quite a long way out here, but I believe that hydrogen will be the future technology, especially for things like cars. And there's already companies that are taking the forefront on hydrogen, because the thing about hydrogen is you can make a hydrogen combustible engine, combustion engine, not combustible. That would mean it's going up in flames. But you can make a hydrogen combustion engine, and you can also make a hydrogen fuel cell engine. So the fuel cell engines, there's already cars being sold out there. There's just not, hydrogen's just not widely available right now. But there's already cars that are available. You can buy them in places like the US with hydrogen fuel cells. And there is a few hydrogen fuel stations out there. And hydrogen is as cheap, I mean, as expensive as oil or gasoline to get. So really, but the thing is, it's sustainable because it's abundant. So because you can essentially use seawater. So I really think hydrogen is the future. And one person you should maybe check out is JCB in England, because JCB is really leading the charge on this. I think they're well ahead of everybody else because, as they explain, electric for like industrial equipment and machinery, they do like tractors, front loaders, all that kind of stuff for construction and stuff like that. You know, battery power just doesn't work for that kind of work. So they're already ahead on that. They've got hydrogen combustion engines. They made them. So the technology is there, it's ready to use. So why aren't they using it? And again, it comes down to political and commercial interests, as it always does. But eventually, I feel like the electric vehicle scenario that we see right now will be like the diesel thing that happened in Europe. For years and years, diesel was seen as the green new alternative to gasoline. And then we found out down the road that it actually wasn't. And it will be the same with electric vehicles because it's totally unsustainable. It's just ridiculous. I see why they want to go down that route because it enables so much control. Because obviously they can just shut off charges wherever they want and people can't drive. You want to put a city on lockdown, it's very easy to do it if they're driving around electric vehicles. So I think that's part of the reason behind it, but I also think it's just stupidity and political and commercial interests as usual, like we've seen with everything. So hope that makes sense anyway, and I hope this video kind of gave you different insight. We're being bombarded with this Ukraine and Russia thing, and I think it's interesting when you look at all this stuff and then you realize, oh, actually, our countries are just as bad as Russia when it really comes down to it, but they're just out there on the political stage trying to get more approval. Because if you think about it, like, it does really gain a lot of people's approval. Because you think about it, you see all these devastating images coming from Ukraine, and then you hear Joe Biden go, we're going to send loads of weapons, we're going to help them out, we're doing all these sanctions. And most people aren't going to understand, for the most part, that they're not going to do anything, and they're going to make inflation worse in the US and Canada, and they're going to hurt the US economy more than they're going to hurt Russia. But they just see that he's doing something, so he gets my approval on that point. So it's really interesting. It's always interesting the way they frame the narrative. So anyway, it's I didn't see that, Greg. Oh, I did see about Ontario, but I didn't know BC had pulled it as well. Yeah, I mean, that's really going to stop them, isn't it? They've already purchased that. I mean, doesn't that just show you the lunacy of the governments? Because, I mean, that just shows you how they're fronting it, because they've already bought that alcohol. So if they're not going to sell it, again, who's losing? Who's paying for that? If it's the LCBO in Ontario, that's the government. So it's the government who's bought that and paid for that. And yeah, it's grandstanding. Exactly, Greg. That's the word I was looking for. And they're always trying to do this. But isn't that just funny? Because again, who's picking up the bill for that? Oh, it's the taxpayer. So we could have just bought that, drank it, whatever. I don't drink alcohol, but some people might like Russian vodka. I don't know, but they've already bought it. It's just absolutely insane to me. But yeah, it's grandstanding, like Greg says. But just don't believe everything you say in the media. The BCLC is also the government. Yeah, so again, tax dollars being used to basically grandstand and say, we're doing this when we're actually doing nothing. And by the way, just in the shadows, we're also funding wars that kill loads of civilians in other countries, but they're not in your face like this one. So you don't really care about that. But if that was in your face, then we're going to suddenly do something about it. Then we're going to really care about it. But the thing is, that serves our political interests. So we'll just leave that one in the shadows. However, the Russian one, we want to come out and attack them and act like Russia is anti-democracy, which it might be, I don't know, and everything like that. And we're championing democracy just after what Justin Trudeau did with the truckers and basically freezing bank accounts and everything like that. It's been confirmed multiple bank accounts were frozen by people. So it's just insane. And the banking system in Canada will be never ever be thought of the same. They've completely changed the perception on that. Loads of people are pulling their money out of the banks. They don't trust the banking system anymore. And that is something they've completely just got rid of. And money laundering, you can kiss goodbye to that one, because money launderers, after what's just happened, are not going to want to launder money through Canada. I can tell you that. Or maybe they will, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, guys, please smash the hell out of that like button, because more people will see this come up in their feed, just the way the YouTube algorithm works. Thank you so much for being on this stream as usual, and for listening to this, and share this with people, because I think people need to see that countries, you know, like Canada, the US, the UK, we are just as bad as countries like Russia. So it is total hypocrisy to come out and condemn what Russia is doing whilst funding other wars in other places like Yemen indirectly, and sending weapons, making weapons that are killing those civilians. And I don't condone war. I want to make that clear. I don't condone violence. I think it's all wrong and it should all be stopped. But those are the facts. So anyway, guys, I'll see you in the next stream. Let me know in the comments what you want to see in the next stream. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Cal, Sandeep, Mr. Fool, Asian Sammy, for all being here. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.